What happens when the person who once tormented you now holds the key to your career? Michael Johnson, a talented black marketer, has worked hard to build his reputation. But when he joins a prestigious company, he faces a shocking discovery. His new boss is none other than Josh Harper, the same man who made his high school years a living nightmare with his racist behavior. Josh, still arrogant and full of prejudice, is now determined to undermine Michael at every turn. But life has a way of flipping the script. As the company faces a major crisis, Michael's skills become their last hope for survival. Suddenly, the roles are reversed, and it's Josh who finds himself on the brink of losing everything. Now, Michael has a choice: seek revenge or offer a lifeline. What will he do when the chance for payback is right in front of him? Subscribe and hit the bell to stay tuned for the full story and see how this tense confrontation unfolds. Michael Johnson stood outside the gleaming glass doors of Horizon Ads, his breath forming a cloud in the crisp morning air. This was it. After years of grinding away at smaller firms, climbing the corporate ladder one painstaking rung at a time, he had finally made it to one of the top marketing agencies in the city. Horizon Ads was known for its cutting-edge campaigns and for working with some of the most high-profile clients in the industry. It was the kind of place where reputations were made or broken. For Michael, this was his shot to prove himself, to show the world what he was capable of. He took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and stepped inside. The lobby was as modern and sleek as he'd imagined. Bright, airy, and bustling with energy. Glass walls stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with the silhouettes of busy professionals darting back and forth, armed with laptops and smartphones. There was a palpable sense of urgency and ambition in the air, a kind of electricity that buzzed just beneath the surface. Michael felt a thrill of excitement as he walked up to the reception desk. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" The receptionist greeted him with a bright smile. "Hi, I'm Michael Johnson. I'm starting today," he replied, his own smile broadening. Saying those words felt good. He'd worked hard to earn his place here. "Ah, Mr. Johnson, welcome to Horizon Ads. Let me get someone from HR to escort you to your new office," she said, typing quickly on her keyboard. As Michael waited, he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. He'd come a long way. From a modest upbringing in a neighborhood where opportunities were few and far between, he'd fought his way through school, through college, and through every job that tried to box him in or define him by his skin color. He had faced down racism and ignorance at every turn, but he had kept pushing forward. Now, he was here, in one of the most respected agencies in the industry. A young woman from HR came to greet him and took him through the maze of glass-walled offices and open workspaces, explaining the layout of the departments and the company culture. Michael nodded along, taking it all in, already imagining how he'd make his mark here. Then, as they turned a corner, he saw him, standing by the large glass windows at the end of the hallway, laughing loudly with a group of colleagues, was Josh Harper. Michael's stomach twisted into knots. Josh was his new boss, the director of marketing, and he was also a ghost from Michael's past. A ghost he had hoped never to see again. Michael's mind flashed back to high school. Josh Harper, the golden boy, tall, athletic, and from a wealthy white family. He was the quarterback of the football team, dated the cheerleading captain, and had an easy charm that seemed to draw people in. But beneath that facade, Josh was cruel, arrogant, and a blatant racist. He had targeted Michael since day one, picking on him for his accent, his skin color, his very existence. "You don't belong here," Josh would often say, accompanied by his trademark smirk. "Go back to where you came from." It wasn't just verbal abuse. Josh had orchestrated a campaign of bullying that left Michael isolated, humiliated, and afraid. There were the accidental spills in the cafeteria, the racist notes stuffed into his locker, and the times Josh and his friends would corner him after school, taunting him with racist slurs. Teachers often turned a blind eye, and Michael, with no real allies in that environment, had to endure it in silence. Michael shook his head, pulling himself back to the present. It had been years since high school, but the memories felt fresh, like reopened wounds. He had worked hard to bury those feelings, to build himself into the confident, competent professional he was today. But seeing Josh again, here of all places, brought it all rushing back. Josh turned his head slightly, and their eyes met. For a moment, there was a flicker of surprise on Josh's face, but it quickly melted into something that looked almost like amusement. He leaned over to one of his colleagues and whispered something, causing them to laugh. Then, with a slow, deliberate stride, he walked over to Michael. "Well, well, well," Josh said, his voice dripping with mock surprise. "If it isn't Michael Johnson, didn't think I'd see you here." His eyes scanned Michael up and down, his lips curling into a familiar smirk. "Guess Horizon's standards aren't as high as they used to be." Michael clenched his jaw, but forced a calm smile. "Good to see you too, Josh," he replied, keeping his tone steady. "I'm looking forward to contributing to the team." Josh chuckled, a cold, condescending sound. "We'll see about that," he said, his smirk widening. "Good luck. You'll need it." As Josh walked away, Michael could feel the eyes of the other employees on him. Some looked curious. Others seemed to exchange knowing glances. It was clear that Josh had already started sowing seeds of doubt about him. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to let Josh see any sign of weakness. He took a deep breath and continued walking, determined to prove himself despite whatever games Josh had in store for him. The days that followed felt like a waking nightmare. Michael had hoped that people could change, that maybe with the passage of time Josh had matured. But it quickly became apparent that Josh was still as vindictive and racist as he had been in high school. Only now, he had the authority to make Michael's professional life just as miserable as his teenage years. Michael was assigned to a team working on a new campaign for a high-profile client. He was excited. It was exactly the kind of challenge he thrived on. But from the beginning, Josh made it clear that he was not going to make things easy. During the first team meeting, Michael presented a well-thought-out strategy that he had spent days preparing. He spoke with confidence, detailing the research and insights behind his ideas. When he finished, there was a moment of silence, and then Josh spoke. "Interesting approach, Michael," he said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "But I'm not sure it aligns with what we're looking for. Maybe try to keep it a bit simpler next time. Something more on your level." Michael could feel the sting of humiliation wash over him as the room filled with awkward coughs and averted gazes. "I'm open to feedback," he said carefully, refusing to let his frustration show. "But I believe this strategy could really elevate our brand presence." Josh chuckled, a sharp sound that cut through the room. "Sure, we'll consider it," he said dismissively. "But for now, let's move on." As the days went by, it became a pattern. Michael would propose ideas, and Josh would shoot them down, sometimes with thinly veiled condescension, sometimes with outright mockery. "That's cute, Michael, but let's leave the big ideas to those who know what they're doing," he'd say, always with that same smirk. Colleagues began to distance themselves from Michael, wary of aligning themselves with someone who was clearly on Josh's bad side. Conversations would hush when he walked by, and he'd often find himself sitting alone during lunch breaks, the same way he had been back in high school. The isolation was suffocating. But Michael wasn't about to give Josh the satisfaction of seeing him break. At night, Michael found himself unable to sleep, his mind replaying the day's events over and over. Memories of high school flooded back, times when he had been cornered in the locker room or ambushed on his way home, with Josh leading the pack of tormentors. "Why don't you go back to Africa, Johnson?" they'd yell, shoving him against the wall. He remembered the fear, the helplessness, the anger. But this was different. He was different. He was no longer that scared teenager who had to endure in silence. He had fought too hard to let himself be pushed around now. So, Michael decided he wouldn't give up. He'd keep working, keep pushing, and most importantly, he'd find a way to show everyone his true value. As weeks went by, Michael's situation only worsened. Josh seemed determined to make every day a struggle. He'd assign Michael the least desirable tasks, things that were well below his skill level. When it came to important meetings with clients, Josh would either exclude Michael or give him menial roles that offered no visibility or growth. The worst was the rumor mill. Josh had started spreading whispers that Michael was only hired because of the company's diversity initiative, implying that he wasn't qualified for the job. Some colleagues, especially those new to Michael, seemed to buy into it. Whenever he walked into a room, he could sense the skeptical looks, hear the faint whispers. Is he really good? Or is he just a quota hire? The words hung in the air, poisoning the atmosphere. But Michael kept his head down and worked harder than ever. He stayed late, poring over data, refining his strategies, and preparing for any opportunity to prove himself. He refused to let Josh's toxic influence break him. He believed in his abilities and knew that if he kept pushing, he'd find a way to turn things around. Then came the breaking point. Horizon Ads was facing a major crisis. The company had lost several key clients due to underwhelming campaign results, many of which had been overseen by Josh himself. The board of directors was getting anxious. Revenue was declining and morale was low. Everyone knew that something had to change. In a tense company-wide meeting, Josh tried to deflect blame, pointing fingers at everyone but himself. "We need more creativity, more innovation," he declared, his voice rising with feigned passion. "Some of you aren't pulling your weight, and it's dragging us down." Michael couldn't take it anymore. He had kept quiet, played it safe, hoping to find a way through. But now was not the time for silence. He raised his hand. "If I may," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I believe I have a strategy that could help us turn things around. It's something I've been working on for the past few weeks." Josh shot him a glare that could freeze fire. But Michael didn't back down. He stood up and walked to the front of the room, pulling out a series of charts and data points he had meticulously prepared. As he spoke, he could feel the eyes of the room on him, not with doubt this time, but with interest. He laid out his plan clearly and confidently, detailing how they could reposition the brand, tap into new markets, and rebuild their client relationships. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, one of the senior board members, Mr. Rodriguez, nodded slowly. "This is compelling, Michael," he said. "This could work. Why haven't we heard this before?" Michael took a breath. "I've tried to present my ideas in the past, but I wasn't given the chance," he said, glancing at Josh, whose face was turning a deep shade of red. The board members exchanged glances. It was clear they were considering their options. Josh opened his mouth to speak, but Mr. Rodriguez cut him off. "Thank you, Michael. We'll be discussing this further. Everyone else, back to work." As the room emptied, Josh stormed over to Michael. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed. "Trying to make me look bad in front of the board?" Michael met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm just doing my job, Josh. Maybe you should try it sometime." Josh's eyes blazed with fury, but he said nothing more. Michael walked away, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time since he started at Horizon Ads, he felt a spark of hope. He knew he wasn't out of the woods yet, but he also knew that he had just taken his first real step toward something better. The next few days at Horizon Ads were filled with a tense, almost electric energy. Michael could feel the shift in the atmosphere. People who had once avoided him now seemed more willing to engage in conversation. Some even came up to him to congratulate him on his presentation. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. For the first time since he started, he felt the tide beginning to turn in his favor. However, things were not looking good for Josh. After Michael's presentation, the board members had begun scrutinizing Josh's performance more closely. They started to question some of his decisions, especially those that had led to the loss of several high-profile clients. His usual air of confidence had given way to frustration and paranoia. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Josh decided to double down on his efforts to undermine Michael. He began assigning him impossible tasks with unreasonable deadlines, setting him up to fail. He would call Michael into his office to review his work, only to rip it apart without offering any constructive feedback. His words were filled with thinly veiled threats and contempt. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling day filled with back-to-back meetings and a mountain of work, Michael found himself called into Josh's office yet again. The blinds were closed, and the room felt dark and claustrophobic. Josh sat behind his desk, his expression hard and unreadable. "Sit down, Michael," he said, his tone colder than usual. Michael took a seat, his face calm, though he could feel his pulse quickening. He knew this wasn't going to be good. Josh leaned forward, folding his hands together. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I've had enough of it. You think you can just waltz in here and make me look like a fool? I've worked too damn hard for this." Michael met his gaze, his expression unwavering. "I'm just doing my job, Josh. I've worked hard too, and I'm here to make this company better." Josh's eyes narrowed. "Don't give me that crap," he snapped. "You think you're better than me. You think you deserve to be here more than I do." Michael took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "It's not about being better, Josh. It's about being good at what we do. And right now, this company needs good ideas, not petty rivalries." Josh's face turned red with anger. He slammed his hand down on the desk. "I'm warning you, Michael. You're treading on thin ice. One wrong move, and you're out of here." Michael felt a surge of frustration. "You know, Josh, I've spent my whole life dealing with people like you. People who think they're better just because of where they come from or what they look like. I'm not afraid of you." Josh's mouth twitched, his eyes flashing with something that looked almost like hatred. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Now get out." As Michael left the office, he felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The constant battle was wearing him down, but he refused to let Josh break him. He had fought too hard to get here, and he wasn't going to give up now. He would keep pushing, keep working, and prove to everyone that he belonged. The weeks rolled on, and the pressure only intensified. The company's financial struggles continued, and the board was growing increasingly restless. Josh, sensing his position was slipping, became even more erratic. He began micromanaging his team to the point of madness, nitpicking every detail and lashing out over minor mistakes. The office atmosphere grew toxic, and morale plummeted. The staff started whispering about his outbursts behind closed doors. Despite the chaos, Michael remained focused. He knew that the company was on the brink of a major shift, and he was determined to be at the forefront of it. He continued refining his strategy, staying late to work on new ideas, and developing a plan that could potentially save Horizon Ads from its downward spiral. But then, things took an unexpected turn. One day, during a routine meeting, a bombshell dropped. The board of directors announced that they were considering restructuring the leadership team due to declining performance and financial losses. For Josh, this was a direct blow. The board's patience with him was wearing thin, and he could sense the noose tightening. That evening, after everyone had left the office, Michael stayed behind to finish some last-minute work. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the fluorescent lights. He was deep in concentration when he heard a loud crash from Josh's office down the hall. He hesitated for a moment, then got up to see what had happened. As he approached the door, he could hear Josh's voice, angry, desperate. "This is bullshit," Josh was yelling, his voice slurred. "I've given everything to this company, and they just want to toss me aside." Michael peeked in through the partially open door. Josh was standing by his desk, a half-empty bottle of whiskey clutched in his hand. His usually neat desk was in disarray, papers scattered everywhere, a broken picture frame on the floor. He was a mess. For a moment, Michael considered walking away. Let Josh drown in his own misery. Let him face the consequences of his actions. But then he saw something in Josh's eyes. Fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. And beneath that, a hint of regret. Before he could think it through, Michael knocked on the door. Josh looked up, his eyes bleary. "What the hell do you want?" he snarled. Michael took a step inside. "Josh, you need to calm down," he said, his voice steady. "This isn't going to help." Josh let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, so now you're here to give me advice, the guy who's been trying to take my job." Michael shook his head. "I'm not trying to take your job, Josh. I'm trying to save this company. And you should be too." Josh staggered, almost losing his balance. "Save it? From what? Me?" His voice cracked, and for a moment, he looked almost vulnerable. "I've lost everything, Michael. They're going to fire me, and it's all because of you." Michael felt a pang of empathy. Despite everything Josh had put him through, he stepped closer. "No, Josh. It's because you've been making the wrong choices. But it's not too late to turn things around." Josh looked at him, his face a mix of anger and desperation. "Why are you even here, Johnson? After everything I did to you?" "Why?" Michael took a deep breath. "Because I believe people can change. And I believe in second chances." For a moment, Josh just stared at him, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Then, slowly, he sank down into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know what to do," he whispered, his voice breaking. Michael looked at him, and for the first time, he didn't see the arrogant bully from high school. He saw a man who was lost, who had let his own bitterness and prejudice consume him. And he saw an opportunity, a chance to help him find his way back. "Let's work on this together," Michael said quietly. "We can still save the company, but you have to be willing to change." Josh looked up, his eyes filled with tears. He nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." The days that followed were a whirlwind. With the looming threat of leadership changes, Michael and Josh began working together, albeit cautiously. At first, their interactions were strained. Decades of animosity and resentment don't disappear overnight. But as they started to focus on the work, something shifted. Michael began to see a different side of Josh. Beneath the bravado and arrogance was a man who was deeply insecure. Someone who had always felt the need to prove himself to others, even if it meant stepping on those beneath him. Josh, in turn, began to recognize the strength and resilience in Michael, qualities he had once dismissed out of ignorance and prejudice. For the first time, they found common ground. They stayed late, poring over data, brainstorming new campaign ideas, and crafting strategies that could help Horizon Ads recover. Michael took the lead, but he also encouraged Josh to contribute, to share his thoughts and insights. Slowly but surely, they started to build a sense of trust. One night, after hours of working through a particularly challenging problem, Josh leaned back in his chair and let out a sigh. "You know, I never really apologized for how I treated you back then," he said quietly, "in high school and here." Michael looked at him, surprised by the sudden admission. "You did a lot of damage, Josh," he said honestly, "but I appreciate you saying that." Josh nodded, staring down at his hands. "I was a jerk. No, worse. I was a racist. And I'm sorry. I've been holding on to a lot of anger and resentment, and I took it out on you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say it." Michael considered his words, the sincerity in his voice. "I can't forget what happened," he replied slowly, "but I can see you're trying to change, and that's a start." From that moment on, things were different. The tension between them eased, replaced by a growing sense of camaraderie. Together, they refined Michael's plan, adding new elements and cutting what wasn't working. The campaign was shaping up to be something bold, innovative, and exactly what the company needed to turn things around. The day of the final presentation to the board arrived. The stakes were higher than ever. If this pitch failed, Josh would almost certainly be fired, and the company would likely continue its decline. Michael and Josh stood side by side as they prepared to present, their nerves palpable. "Ready?" Michael asked, glancing at Josh. Josh nodded, his face set with determination. "Yeah, let's do this." They stepped into the boardroom, where the directors sat, waiting expectantly. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Michael took a deep breath and began the presentation. He spoke with clarity and confidence, laying out the strategy they had worked so hard on. He could see the board members nodding along, their expressions shifting from skepticism to intrigue. When Michael finished, he turned to Josh, who stepped forward to explain the next phase of the plan. There was a moment of hesitation. Michael could see it in Josh's eyes. But then he started speaking, his voice steady and clear. He talked about the mistakes that had been made, about the lessons learned, and about the commitment to doing better. The board members listened intently, and when Josh finished, there was a long, heavy silence. Then, Mr. Rodriguez, the senior board member, leaned forward. "This is a solid plan," he said slowly. "But more importantly, I see a genuine effort to change and improve. That's what this company needs right now." The room erupted in applause. Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had done it. They had saved the company. In the weeks that followed, the new campaign launched, and the results were better than anyone could have hoped. Clients started coming back, and new ones were drawn in by the fresh, innovative approach. The company was back on track, and the atmosphere in the office shifted from tension and anxiety to hope and excitement. Josh continued to work under Michael's leadership, embracing his new role with humility and a renewed sense of purpose. He knew he had a long way to go in making amends, but he was committed to the journey. For Michael, it was a powerful reminder of the impact that forgiveness and understanding could have. They were no longer enemies, no longer haunted by the shadows of their past. They had become something new, partners in the truest sense, working together to build something better. And as Horizon Ads began to rise once more, Michael realized that the most important battles aren't won with anger or revenge, but with empathy, courage, and the willingness to believe in change. As the days turned into weeks, Horizon Ads continued to thrive under the new leadership dynamics. The success of the recent campaign had not only saved the company, but also shifted the workplace culture. Employees began to feel a renewed sense of purpose, a collective drive to innovate and succeed. The office buzzed with excitement as new opportunities and projects poured in. For Josh, this period was a time of intense reflection. Each day, he faced the reality of his past actions and the consequences they had brought upon him. He had been given a second chance, something most people don't get, and he wasn't about to waste it. He knew he needed to make things right, not just with Michael, but with everyone he had wronged or hurt over the years. One afternoon, after a particularly productive brainstorming session with the team, Josh asked Michael if they could speak privately. Michael agreed, though he wasn't sure what to expect. They stepped into a small conference room, the tension between them palpable, but not hostile. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Josh began, his voice sincere, "about everything, about the person I was and the person I want to be." Michael nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I've been a real bastard," Josh admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I let my privilege blind me, and I never considered how my actions affected others. I don't know if I'll ever truly make up for it, but I want to try. I'm sorry, Michael, for everything, for high school, for here, for all of it." Michael took a deep breath. He had waited a long time to hear those words, but he also knew that apologies alone weren't enough. "I appreciate that, Josh," he said. "But it's not just about saying sorry. It's about what you do next. Words are one thing, actions are another." Josh nodded. "I get that. I really do. And I want you to know that I'm committed to being better, not just for myself, but for everyone here." For a moment, there was silence between them, a silence filled with understanding. Michael could see that Josh was sincere, that he was genuinely trying to change. And that was a start. "All right," Michael said finally. "Let's move forward. But remember, change isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight." Josh smiled, a small, genuine smile. "I know, but I'm willing to work for it." In the months that followed, Josh made a conscious effort to rebuild his relationships within the company. He took the time to listen to his colleagues, to understand their perspectives, and to show humility where he had once been arrogant. It wasn't easy. Many people were still wary of him, and trust was not something that could be earned back overnight. But Josh was patient. He knew he had a lot to make up for. He began attending diversity and inclusion workshops, not as a formality, but as a genuine effort to educate himself. He sought out conversations with people he had once ignored or belittled, asking for their feedback and genuinely wanting to learn how he could do better. Slowly, he started to gain the respect of his peers, not through grand gestures, but through consistent, honest effort. Meanwhile, Michael continued to lead the marketing department with the same passion and vision that had turned the company around. He noticed the change in Josh, how he was trying to make amends, and he respected that. The two of them began to work more closely, not as adversaries, but as collaborators. Their brainstorming sessions were dynamic, their ideas flowed, and the team felt the difference. One day, during a casual lunch break, Josh sat down next to Michael in the cafeteria. "You know," he said, taking a sip of his coffee, "I've learned more in these past few months than I did in my entire career before. Funny how life works, huh?" Michael chuckled. "Life has a way of teaching us lessons when we least expect it." Josh nodded. "I'm just glad I got the chance to learn it now, before it was too late." The real test of Josh's transformation came when Horizon Ads was presented with a major opportunity, a massive contract with a well-known multinational corporation. The catch? The corporation had a questionable reputation, known for exploiting labor and having a history of discriminatory practices. The board saw dollar signs, but Michael and Josh saw a moral dilemma. The board was excited. This contract could bring in millions and solidify Horizon Ads' position as a market leader. But Michael felt uneasy about partnering with a company that didn't align with their values. He decided to raise the issue at the next executive meeting. "We need to consider the ethical implications of this partnership," Michael said firmly. "This company has a track record that goes against everything we've been trying to build here. Do we really want to compromise our integrity for a big payout?" There were murmurs around the table. Some agreed with Michael, while others seemed swayed by the potential profits. Then, to Michael's surprise, Josh spoke up. "I think Michael is right," Josh said. "We've been working hard to change the culture here, to build something we're proud of. If we take this deal, what message are we sending to our team and our clients? That we're willing to look the other way when it's convenient. I say we pass on it." The room went silent. The board members exchanged glances, clearly surprised by Josh's stance. But his words carried weight. After a long discussion, they decided to turn down the contract, choosing integrity over profit. It was a risky decision, but one that ultimately paid off. The decision was a turning point for the company and for Josh. It showed everyone that he was truly committed to the new direction, willing to stand by his convictions even when it wasn't easy. For Michael, it was a moment of validation, a sign that his decision to give Josh a second chance had been the right one. As the months turned into a year, Horizon Ads continued to grow and thrive. The company became known not only for its creative and effective marketing strategies, but also for its strong ethical stance and inclusive culture. Michael's leadership had transformed the company from the inside out, and Josh's redemption story became a testament to the power of change. One day, as they were wrapping up another successful meeting, Josh turned to Michael. "I've been thinking about starting a new initiative here, something focused on mentorship and support for minority employees, helping them navigate the industry and develop their skills. What do you think?" Michael smiled. "I think that's a great idea, Josh. Let's make it happen." Together, they launched the initiative, bringing in guest speakers, organizing workshops, and creating a mentorship program that paired senior leaders with up-and-coming talent from diverse backgrounds. The program was a huge success, and it became a cornerstone of the company's culture. Michael and Josh had come a long way from their high school days, from a relationship built on animosity and prejudice to one of mutual respect and collaboration. They had learned to see beyond their past, to build something better together. And as they stood side by side, looking out at the bright, bustling office filled with diverse voices and ideas, they knew they were building a legacy that would last, a legacy of growth, change, and the power of second chances.